Welcome to Santa Barbara Talks with Josh Molina. If you're new to this podcast, please hit subscribe on YouTube and also visit santabarbaratalks.com and consider making a contribution to support these podcasts. I'm here today with Tom Widroe, a longtime friend and associate and somebody who I've written about and has been on this show, more than once in the past. And it's always a pleasure to be able to talk to you about all the issues of concern going on politically, culturally in our county and throughout the state. Tom Widroe, how you doing today?
Good, Josh. Thanks for having me back on your podcast, which I think has just gotten like fine wine. It's continuing to age well. It's the kind of long format that you do complements your journalism that you do at Newshawk. So, yeah, it's great to be here.
Yes, well, thank you. I like having a little bit of a deeper conversation where we can give you and the guests an opportunity to say what's on their mind. So that's what we're going to do today. Tom, I want to talk first about Republican Party county politics. You were recently reelected to the Republican Central Committee, and we know there's always this challenge in Santa Barbara County with party registration. There are a number of conservatives or a number of no party preferences, but this is predominantly a Democratic party registration county. And those are challenges that the party is constantly going up against when trying to gain more power. Obviously, on the South County, it's a little bit better for you guys in the North County. But how are things going from a party perspective right now? Are you guys pulling it together, or are there still factions within the organization? What's your perspective, somebody who's newly elected to this committee?
Well, let's see. So first of all, I would say I've been at one point I was chair of the Santa Barbara County Republican Central Committee, and those who know me know I've been involved in the Republican Party for many years. My first role was I worked for Supervisor Chamberlain, Willie Chamberlain, back in the day. I had the pleasure of working for Assemblymember Brooks Firestone, and really enjoyed that. And then over 10 years ago, it's hard to believe it's passed, I also worked for Congressional Rep Elton Gallegly.
Yeah.
So I've been involved in that because I'm an unapologetic conservative, and yeah, I think the Republican Party, to get to your question, Josh, in Santa Barbara County, I think the less good news for those of us who kind of share, pro business, pro prosperity values, pro housing, pro economic development. I think the less good news is that like you said, there's a registration differential that really mirrors a problem throughout the state of California. And, I'm not saying that Republican Party can't be influential, and I think it can be. It may have made an impact in the supervisorial election between Doss Williams and Roy Lee. But, so I agreed to run again. I'm also head of Santa Barbara County Taxpayers Association.
Oh, yeah.
So, that may have elevated. I think I was the top vote getter. My interest is in pragmatic solutions that generate tax revenue. I believe that we need to build housing. I think the Republican Party is the place for that. That we're focused on. It's really tough to live here, Josh. I've got 4 kids. Okay, 4 teenagers. A 3-bedroom, 2-bath house in Goleta, you can find it for about $1.4 million. And, I look at, taking it back to party politics, I look at what kind of economic decisions are made in our county, and we're not very pro housing. We're 25,000 units behind what Sacramento has kind of said, would account for population growth. So anyhow, the Republican Party, I would like it to be more of a competitive party, but I do think they make a difference. And if you look at some of the offices in special districts, some city councils in North County, I think Republicans are represented, but not nearly enough.
Yeah. So Tom, you kind of went through your background and who you had worked with. I've never really asked you this question. Obviously, I know you're a conservative, but why are you a conservative? What happened in your life that made you say, this is the party I identify with? Were you raised that way? Your parents? Did you have a moment in adulthood? Why is Tom Widroe a conservative Republican?
It's a really good question. That's what makes podcasts fun. Uh, so it's such a good question. So I grew up in Berkeley, California. Did you know
Uh,
that the first 10 years of my life, I was right there as a kid in the anti-war movement of the late 60s. And so the first 10 years of my life, I saw some of the chaos that became Berkeley. So that had an impact on me as a young person. It was, chaotic, and there were riots, and those of you who know your history, the anti-war movement um, in Berkeley in the 1960s and 70s was certainly impactful and changed Berkeley forever. So, and then I kind of, as I became cognizant of politically, I came of age in the era of Ronald Reagan.
mhm.
So the first campaign I ever worked for was I went out as a junior in high school out for extra credit. They said you could work for a presidential campaign and you could choose Carter or Reagan in 1980. And I went out to make phone calls for Ronald Reagan because and my parents, I'd probably call them California conservatives, maybe John McCain type conservatives. I don't know. But when I heard Reagan, I'm part of that vanguard of folks who grew up in my era, and really young people were, by the time I got to college, Josh, at UCSB, the college students were conservative, and it was cool to support Ronald Reagan at the time,
Mhm.
and it was our professors who were appalled at that. So I wrote a paper my junior year in high school for summer school in my government class that defended the Strategic Defense Initiative run by Caspar Weinberger that the press derisively called Star Wars. And I wrote a defense because I thought it made a lot of sense. If you could shoot Russian Soviet missiles out of the sky, it made sense. But boy, and my teacher gave me an A minus instead of an A because he said I was wrong. So I thought that was funny. So anyway, it's a good question. I really I like the idea of American greatness. I'm proud of our country. I love our diversity, our pluralistic society. Freedom of that freedom of speech used to be really a liberal. Mario Savio at Berkeley, the free speech movement in the 60s. He got up in a microphone and started saying the F bomb all over the place. And that was a big deal in 1960, whatever. Um, Nowadays, people say it all the time. We won't say it on our show. But I like the melting pot. I like the idea of a colorblind society where we're all trying to aspire to live life on our own terms. I'll tell you this. I've evolved my thinking. The true revolution of America, Josh, is that you and I get to live our lives on our own terms. We're sovereign over our own affairs, largely. That's a revolution in history. And I was a history student at UCSB. I got a master's degree at UCSB in history and public policy. And I just see that the city on a hill that America is a place where you can raise your family, Josh, and be a journalist. I can get into politics on my end or run the Taxpayers Association or be a consultant. And there was a time when and there's still a lot of places in this world where you don't have that freedom to pursue your dreams. So I know I went on about that, but it's a great question about
What did
how
your
I've kind of.
parents, no, that's all fascinating. I didn't know any of that. What did your parents do that you grew up in Berkeley? What were their jobs?
So my dad came from Wisconsin, grew up outside Milwaukee. He's a big Packers fan. My mom from West Virginia. They met at the University of Chicago, and they decided that they would seek greener pastures in California. By the way, Josh, California, people literally used to see California as paved with gold. Okay, so if you go back to that era, late 50s, early 60s, Pat Brown was governor, he's a Democrat, and we're building freeways and the UC system. And there's just, if you wanted to succeed and you had skills, and you had a vision, there's no better place to come than California. Now we have people leaving California, right? We have people exiting California because back then you could go to Orange County, you could go to Northern California, you could be a middle class person working as an engineer, you could go on 2 vacations a year. It just the possibilities were endless. And anyhow, it's just I'm sorry, what was your question again? I
I just
lost
want to know
you.
what your parents did growing up in Berkeley. Were
Oh,
they
my
teachers or
so
what?
my dad's a medical doctor.
Mhm.
So he started off he's now 90 years old.
Oh,
He's retired. And thank God he's still alive. I love my dad very much and my mom. So my mom took care of, I have 2 brothers and a sister. My uh, dad was an emergency surgeon at Mount Zion Hospital in San Francisco. And then he eventually specialized in psychiatry. And my dad was on the forefront of psychiatric care in the nation, and you know, definitely built a strong practice. And now he runs a company called Comprehensive Psychiatric Services in the Bay Area with multiple offices throughout California. And yeah, he you know, he really forged a way. My dad's a super smart guy, and you know, so proud of what he's done in the field of psychiatry and mental health. This idea that, you know, back then there was a time, Josh, when you know, people would look, you just toss the mentally ill into institutions and treat them all the same, right? There's electroshock therapy. There's some real horror stories about mental health care. And what my dad was in the vanguard was this idea that you can, through medication and brain chemistry, treat depression, anxiety, and then more serious, you know, psychosis, you know, forms of mental illness. So, yeah, and my mom, you know, dealt with us 4 kids, which was not easy. That was probably much more difficult than going to work every day. So, um, we're a challenging
fascinating.
bunch.
Yeah. So let's talk about some big picture sort of conservative issues right now. We're in an election year, and then I want to also talk about, like, you know, some local stuff as well. But let's start with sort of national situation. You know, Donald Trump is now a convicted felon, right? He's still very popular, right? People have all these beliefs that, you know, it's unfair. He's been targeted. You know, it's not legitimate, and all these things. A lot of people still think, you know, he won the last election. Do you still support Donald Trump? And can you explain why, if you do, Tom?
Well,
I want to
it's
talk to
like
you about this. Yeah.
it's like you're talking, looking at it. And could I be like some zoo animal or alien creature? Do you still support Donald Trump? It's just
How do
puzzling to
you
me.
support Donald Trump after everything we know, Tom? How about that?
Right, right. I'm expecting you to go apoplectic here. Don't lose yourself, Josh. It's gonna be okay. So, uh, look, I'm gonna vote for Donald Trump, and you know, he's a flawed character for sure. Um, but I think it's fascinating how the Democrat Party is narrowing its appeal, whereas Donald Trump is right now kind of broadening his appeal. I don't think people have paid much attention to this felony conviction. I think they largely think it's political, and I think largely they're correct on this one. I mean, I'm not saying, you know, Donald Trump, you know, doesn't have his flaws, and you know, I'm sure my liberal friends would say it's much worse than that. But you know, the other day he went on Logan Paul, you know, and he's talking about cryptocurrency, NFTs, you know, non-fungible tokens. You know, he's conversant on all this stuff, and um, his numbers. I think he's only 2 points behind with young people right now, which Republican candidate hasn't won the 18 to 29 category since 1988. That was George H.W. Bush. And I think that's just because young people had hoped he'd be like Reagan. And he, you know, so, and he wasn't. Um, so I just think it's interesting. He's going into Harlem, he's going out and he's, he went into New Jersey the other day, and he seems ebullient, and the Democrats seem to be increasingly kind of really. I'm going to say this: it's just more and more of a coastal, a little bit elite. Their priorities on the Democratic Party, things like climate change and abortion. I think on the other side, you see young people who want to start families. They want to buy a house. They want to have kids. They want to prosper. And it's just a disconnect. And that's why I say I don't think people sit there and obsess and look at Trump the way you do, like, oh my God, how can you vote for him? I think it's a little more transactional when people vote. Just like the people voted for Obama. Here's a really interesting fact, Josh. And when Trump was elected in 2016, out of the 700 counties that voted for Barack Obama twice in the United States, 1/3 of those went for Trump in 2016.
Mhm.
You could argue that Obama voters elected Trump in 2016. So I
Yeah.
think they look at it as a binary choice, and
Well,
they just opt
there's no
differently.
doubt, Tom, that a lot of people in this country vote off of personality and popularity. So, former President Obama, very charismatic, outstanding communicator. If you can communicate, you can move people. And,
Yep.
whether if you're in sales and you communicate well, you make money. If you're in politics and you communicate well, you build power. And so there's no doubt that that's a thing. And of course, Donald Trump is very charismatic. He is smart, and he was on TV for 30 years, right? So he's like this character
Right.
that people felt that they're comfortable with and they know. So there's no doubt. Like, I don't doubt that. I mean, if you look at, popular music or popular culture, like, we tend to, just as Americans, as human beings, we tend to be attracted to the things that we think are relatable to us, right? And so there's no doubt. But my issue with Trump is this conservative issue. So I want to talk to you about this. I know you're a God-fearing, conservative, religious man. Like, I know you have that in
I,
you. And
I don't
this,
know how religious I am, but probably but
I
I'm
certainly believe
I'm a
you
man
think
of
there's a
faith.
God and an afterlife, and
Yeah,
the basic tenets of Christianity, right?
sure.
How can conservatives support Trump when he's paying prostitutes and then he's using campaign funds to pay this? Where does morality and ethics come in when we're talking about, this is the party of morality? Like, what? My question is, why is it okay to forgive him for all these other things just because he's, for lower taxes and an immigration wall? Like, how do you navigate that?
Yeah, look, I think if we had to, number one, I think my faith said that we live in a broken world and that we're all sinners. We all make a lot of mistakes all the time, and I'm not excusing Donald Trump's infidelity, By the way, I think it wasn't a prostitute, it was a porn star.
Oh,
So
okay. I'm sorry.
so
I
just to
take
just
that
to make
back.
that
Yeah.
difference. So she
I
was
don't want to disparage whatever her, yeah, I don't want to disparage her. She was a porn star. Okay.
it's whatever she's born, that was, look, and that was her choice to be a sex worker, whatever
Yeah.
you want to call it. Um, and it's ugly. That's ugly behavior. I'm just saying if you have to go and choose your leaders, by everything they have done in their life, they're, gauging their level of morality. I think we probably won't end up. Look, how did the Biden family end up being just fabulously rich? It's extraordinary. I don't know. There were $50 million. You could. People are arguing there's corruption there, and I think there's probably where there's smoke, there's some fire. But I don't think all Democrats are comfortable with that either. I just think you get a binary choice. You choose someone who's imperfect, and flawed, but you're looking for a leader. You're looking for someone who can be commander in chief, protect the interests of the United
But
States.
but Tom,
Um,
Tom,
yeah,
absolutely. We are all flawed. No one is perfect. and good people make mistakes all the time. We absolutely know this. But Donald Trump, I mean, he makes fun of everybody. He makes fun of people who are disabled. He has no respect for
Yeah.
journalists. He is somebody who constantly criticizes anyone who doesn't agree with him. And I know, Tom, if you met this man in real life in your world, you would not allow him in your house. You would keep your daughters away from him. You would say, do not hang. I absolutely know this, but yet when it comes to, like, I
Well,
guess the question is, how are you able to put
I
that
I'd be fine.
morality ahead of,
I'd be fine having Donald Trump over for dinner. I don't, I look, I see him a little differently.
yeah,
Once again, there's a lot of folks, I would never go to the movies or take my kids to the movies if I thought, that the personal lives of movie stars was somehow something that they should emulate. There's a lot of bad behavior out there, and I'm not excusing anything Donald Trump has done that way. But look, I'm going to clarify here what I think if we get past the personalities, Josh, if Joe Biden had done two things, number one, secured the border, continued with Trump's policies on immigration, which narrowed the number of people coming across the border and impacting not only border states, but other states throughout the union, just by sheer numbers, the cost, expense, some of it crime as well. If he'd secured the border, number one, and number two, instead of continuing with Donald Trump's spending policy, and by the way, Trump in 2020 botched his last year in office. He allowed uh, production to be shut down. He also signed off on a massive multi-trillion dollar spending package. And that was a disaster. Why are you and I dealing, Josh? If you want to get down to the difference, it's not about whether Donald Trump, paid off Stormy Daniels, it is about the fact that I have 4 kids and my grocery bill is doubled. Okay. It's hard to live in America right now when housing, gas, food, all this stuff, because we flooded the economy with dollars, right? And when supply and demand, Josh, when the supply of money and cash circulating in the economy far outstrips the availability of services and goods, prices double, triple, and salaries don't keep up. So those are the two issues, and that and public safety. So I've been saying those are the three things since 2022, and I was wrong about the congressional election. It had not hit home yet. But immigration, number one, uh, along with inflation, which is a devaluation of the currency, and public safety. Those are three that cut across party lines. People don't look at Donald Trump as a moral savior. They don't at all. And they look at they don't look at Joe Biden very well either, in terms of who he is as a person, I don't think. But if he had enacted, I think, policies that you and I would agree on generally make sense, I think he'd be winning re-election. But he didn't. He's gone the other direction. We're 34 trillion in debt. And I'm not saying this is a partisan. I'm worried about the interest on the debt, the weight of that debt on the economy. And also you can't impact these cities with what do we have 10, 11, 12 million new people streaming across the border. Eventually our social services are going to break. We can't afford to take care of the entire world at that rate. We've got to have a measured and thoughtful immigration policy. You just got to close it, and you got to make deliberate decisions about who comes here and who doesn't and at what time. Otherwise it's going to be chaos. And that's what people are voting on.
Here's the thing, though, is while there is room for agreement on some of the specifics on policy that you're talking about, there are other Republican candidates who are more qualified than Trump to be the nominee and don't have this baggage, this moral character. And so I guess the question is, like, why is Donald Trump the best and only choice for the Republican Party when there are so many other people who are going to fall pretty much in line where he's at on policy and not be this? I mean, if Tom, I know you say you would have dinner with him.
I would.
But the first time Donald Trump
Have dinner with Joe Biden.
But the first time Donald Trump insulted you or offended you or did something to you in a way that you would all of a sudden be like, oh, that's what everyone is talking about. I don't understand how conservatives give him a pass when, as a person, he is such a bad person. Are you telling me there's no other Republican who could have been a good presidential nominee without that personal baggage?
No, I think your point is where are there other good candidates potentially for president of the United States? I think you're right.
Huh.
Ron DeSantis has turned Florida from a purple state to a red state, and it's not because they fell in love with the Republican Party. He's just shown strong leadership. You look at the governor of Virginia who won there. He by advocating for parents, Glenn Youngkin. He's done a really good job in Virginia. And you look at the governor of Texas, they're behind him, and we have some strong leaders out there, I think, who, and Trump's, vice presidential pick will be interesting as well. Maybe it'll be Doug Burgum. Is it North Dakota or South Dakota? I forget. But he seems like a solid fella. So your point's well taken. Look,
Look at Mike Pence, right? Like, this guy doesn't
yeah,
even vote for Trump, right?
Yeah, I know. I'm not a big Pence fan, and no, I don't think he would. Also, Josh, got to understand something about politics too. Is presidential politics is that I think people, just like when they vote for a president, they also vote for a party representative they think can win, right? That's kind of mostly how they go. They think who can, and the Democrats are kind of ruining the day. They're not sure if Biden can pull this off, right? It's getting pretty old, and they're not sure. And you can see they're kind of the media class in Washington and New York is they're not sure, and they talk of rumblings about should they try to replace him, and I don't think they can. I think they have to stick with him, and probably for good reason. I don't think Kamala Harris is a viable contender. Maybe our governor here in California would come off more charismatically, and maybe that would invigorate the Democrats and foment turnout. But when they looked at Trump, his name ID is through the roof, right? His story's already there. Most Republicans were pretty happy with the first 3 years of his administration. They did not turn out in 2020 because I think he had a failed fourth year of his term. He didn't. I'm not going to sit there and say that shutting down the economy and printing a bunch of money was a good idea. It was a terrible idea. So they're willing to forgive him and say have another crack at it. I just don't think that anyone else. Also, no one ran a good campaign against him. And DeSantis ran a terrible campaign. No one. Can you tell me, Josh, any of the Republicans what they even stand for that ran against him? It was weak sauce, in my opinion. So he was able to bulldoze them easily.
Yeah. Well, it's good to know, Tom. If I ever get caught paying porn stars, you're still going to be my friend. You seem like a very forgiving guy. So
I would be your friend. And if that's, look, what does it say? But by the grace of God go I. We all make mistakes. So
yeah. No.
Would I vote for you for president? I don't know. It depends on your.
Don't vote for me for president if I do that. But
I might.
You might, yeah. No, I just like, I don't disagree with some of the stuff you say regarding policy, but I just think like Donald Trump, give me a break, dude. This guy should have a reality show. He should be on TV. He should not be leading the free world. Like, he should not, because if I can't trust him to make mostly the right moral decisions in the course of a day, I have a hard time thinking he's going to make mostly the right decisions in the White House. Now, I know that, things were a lot different, and I'm not saying everything about it, but for me, the morality, the ethical of the person behind the candidate is too much when you do have other Republican candidates. But I respect your point of view. One thing that we do agree on, Tom, is that when it relates to Trump is I do think people are far too judgmental of people's opinions in this country, in the sense of, like, we need to stop canceling each other because somebody says something we don't agree with. We need to stop trying to, divide And I think if we see the nuances and if we see the common and the similarities, then that's a much better country that we want to live in. And I do think that oddly, conservatives tend to be a little more, as evidenced by your analysis of Trump, inclusive when it comes to a lot of these different kinds of thoughts. Okay. And I think liberals a lot of times want to just remove you from the conversation if you do or say anything at all that they disagree with. And we know free speech is not about protecting comfortable speech and speech we all agree with. It's about protecting things that make us uncomfortable and then hopefully having a debate and a conversation about that. I was annoyed recently because my favorite show, well, probably my top three favorite shows of all time is Seinfeld, and I happen to think Jerry Seinfeld is hilarious, right? And
Me too.
he's like reemerging, doing a tour, blah blah blah, speaking, and he gets all this hate for whatever reason because he talks about how comedy is too politically correct now, and his show today would never make it because people would be so judgmental of his humor, even though at the time it was the greatest show of all time, kind of thing. And so that stuff bothers me that we can't sort of just say, this comedian I don't like, so I'm not going to watch. Fine. But if you don't like him, don't try to get everyone else to not watch him. Just do your own thing, right? So let's talk, where are we at right now from your perspective in terms of our culture wars, our cancel culture? Are we better, worse? I know these are big Republican talking points, big issues that they feel like, hey, everybody wants to cancel each other every time somebody says something they disagree with.
I love that you brought this up, Josh, because it's something that matters to me quite a bit. And I don't know if it's a Republican talking point. I think, yeah, I guess it does get into the mainstream because you do have high profile instances of people getting canceled just because they said something someone else didn't like or agree with. But I love Seinfeld. That's so funny that you say that because I've watched the reruns. I'm, for decades now, right? I watched it when the show was on. It's brilliant show. It's just, if you haven't you're out there watching this podcast and you haven't enjoyed Seinfeld, it's just great. And I hearken back to a different time, Josh, when we could all laugh. We could all just laugh and have fun. And he didn't have a racial, some fellow from CBS News, was it Peter Loria, was interviewing Seinfeld. And he brought up, he's got this audience and folks around. You want to hear from this guy. He's one of the most successful comedians, probably the most successful in the history of comedy. And what does he say? He starts to bring up the racial bean counting of the show. Well, you didn't have very many people of color in your show. And Jerry Seinfeld just rolls his eyes. Well, he said, there we go again. And he was just so annoyed. It ruined the interview, right? I don't think Seinfeld and Larry David, who's a liberal, I don't think they sat there and thought, oh, we have to, have this many people of this race in our show. There were people of color in the shows, different kinds of people, and it was a great show. I hate cancel culture. I don't want anybody telling Josh Molina what you can write, who you can interview, what you can say, what kind of jokes you can make. I don't like it at all. And I think it's bad for society, and it's very much goes against, I think, what the founding fathers believed in that First Amendment. And you astutely pointed that out. Free speech matters not when people agree with you. It matters when people disagree with you. That's when you should be liberated to be able to say something that's controversial, that someone doesn't agree with. Do you know the other day, John McEnroe was interviewed on one of the major shows, and I forget, ABC or CBS, and because he said Serena Williams, get this, he said Serena Williams was not the best tennis player of all time, but rather the best female tennis player of all time. And the woman interviewing him said, do you want to apologize for that statement, John McEnroe? He said, no, because guess what? She's not the best tennis player of all time. And Serena Williams will be the first one to tell you that she would get wiped off the courts by any top male tennis player, and she said it publicly in about 10 minutes, 6-0, 6-0.
Mhm.
And this stuff of governing political correctness, I have no patience for it. I want to watch Seinfeld with you, Josh, have a laugh, a bucket of popcorn, and that to me is good times in America.
Yeah, no, I mean, I will disagree with you slightly. I mean, Seinfeld does have some edgy humor and it does have some jokes, and its New York diversity is
Yep,
it is representative of New York, the show. There are
yep,
not a lot of positive portrayals or any portrayals of Latino or Hispanic characters on that show. But here's the thing, right? It's his show. They made the
he do
show,
what he wants. Yeah,
and it's
I don't know.
funny. And we know Jerry Seinfeld's not a racist. We like
Yeah,
obviously he's not. And if
it,
you don't like that show, don't watch the show. Uh,
correct.
and also the thing about Jerry, and I know some people disagree with this, is that he offends everybody. I mean, like there's no one who is safe, and it's kind of sad to think that if the show debuted today, and they were waiting at the Chinese restaurant with all of
Right.
those jokes that were in there,
Agree.
it would never
Yeah.
make it because everyone would be
No.
just offended, and so, uh,
Well, well,
even though it's
Josh,
like hilarious.
are you so sensitive that you need a trigger warning in front of Blazing Saddles, which is a funny movie in Mel Brooks? Do you need a trigger warning? This is what I don't believe, Josh. Back in the 80s, the era of Reagan, 90s, when I was growing up, I don't need a trigger warning about what the content is. I can watch it and be offended or not be offended or laugh or not laugh. It doesn't matter. I I don't need a safe space. You don't need a safe space. You and I could argue, get in a real argument. I'm sure we would be just fine after the argument. That's the world I like to live in. And Jerry Seinfeld said, I want to live in the land of funny. If it's not funny, I don't want to live there. If it's funny, that's where I want to be. And that's why I love Seinfeld.
Yeah, and so let's talk about that a little bit because I agree with you, but let's go now to sort of this conversation because what is funny and who has trigger warnings and who doesn't, who should have them. Now, what is your take, Tom? Now, there's no doubt as you sit here that you are a white man, right? And we know that white men are the last group that we can
Yes.
offend and not feel bad about it as a culture, right? Like we can make jokes about you as a culture, and it's okay, right? It's like we're not going to get canceled because there's this air that white men are the most privileged among us in our culture, in our society. Can you talk about that? I mean, this is a thing. Do you feel like a privileged man as you walk around that or do you acknowledge that maybe you have some opportunities where you don't need a trigger warning, whereas maybe somebody else who's had a different upbringing, different circumstances, we should be more sensitive to how things impact them. Can you talk about that?
I think in our interpersonal relationships, Josh, we need to be respectful and good to one another. We need to be civilized human beings, regardless of race, color, creed, all that stuff. I personally don't think of you any different because of your ethnic background. I wouldn't even think of it, and um but I do feel privileged, and I'll tell you how. What we all have here in America is called American privilege. That's the thing we should focus on. I was alluding to it earlier that there's never been a better time, despite all the stuff you and I are going over here, the strife. There's never been a better time in history to be an American than right now. Technology. Gosh, my wife just got through cancer. It's just unbelievable. That one of our doctors was Persian. I mean, the racial makeup of the folks that were uh, taking care of her, whether it was in chemo or radiation or surgery, it's just unbelievable. And got fabulous treatment at Cottage Hospital. And it's just never been a better time to be an American. I feel privileged to be here in these United States. with individual human liberty, despite all the strife we have.
Now, I
I
don't know
don't
your
really,
I don't know your
yeah.
healthcare situation, but I think when people talk about privilege and systemic racism, what they talk about is access to the same services. So I don't know your healthcare situation, but do you feel in this country that an African American woman of your wife's age, a Mexican American, somebody, an immigrant who was not born in this country would have the same access to the medical care that you and your family did? I think that's what people talk about when it comes to systemic racism.
So, well, I think it's a legitimate question because you're really talking not just about racism per se, but socioeconomic,
Yeah.
opportunity for healthcare, for education. Look, it's no secret, you know, when people have more money, there's more access to more opportunities, right? I think our healthcare plan is we pay for it and I pay a lot for it. Do my best. I take care of a family of 4 teenagers and a wife, and it's not easy, and healthcare is really expensive. So, but look, when you come here as, regardless of your color or your background, I think it's a challenge. I don't call it systemic racism. I call it more, economic challenges. But I will tell you an example of systemic racism. Um, I would say in the inner cities across America that have been, where primarily African Americans, Black people have struggled under the weight of terrible educational systems, corrupt systems. In Washington, D.C., I think it's $35,000 per pupil per year in D.C. This stuff is unacceptable. It's like 60 years of just crushing failure, and no one cares. So people like me or conservatives say, those people, those moms and dads in those communities should have school choice. They should have, in the worst schools in America, we should be liberating people of color primarily who live in these inner cities. They should have great law enforcement. They should have educational choice to keep these corrupts. Look at Chicago. It's a disaster when it comes to their public school system. There is some. Because what happens in more well-to-do communities, Josh, is the people pool their money and their accountability factor on the system. And even here in California, and there's a lot, you could say there's more white people who do that or more Asian people who do that because they're ticked off. They want to have results. They want their kids to succeed. Black people and Hispanic people want the same things as anyone else of any color. But until we break that vice grip on government run education and allow parents to have authority and sovereignty over their kids' education, I think we're going to still be, you're right. There is some systemic racism there. So they need opportunities and choice and power to the people, to quote, 1960s mantra, power to the people. So, yeah, I think I have some privilege. I was brought up, my dad didn't have anything when he came to California, and he worked really hard to become a doctor that no one ever knew he was going to be a doctor. He's privileged by being an intellect. He's super smart, my dad, and super hardworking. But I'm going to tell you something else, Josh. A remedy for a lot of this stuff, and I know it's unpopular in some circles, but I'll tell you, sobriety. Okay, don't drink too much, don't take too many drugs. If you're gonna have kids, do it when you're married, okay? And get a job or create a job yourself. If you do those 3 things, it's the best war on poverty you could ever have. Because you and I both know your dad, you have a great career. You've dedicated yourself. I have tremendous respect, by the way, for journalists who do actual journalism. It's not an easy job. It doesn't pay a fortune unless you go to, I mean, maybe Josh will scoop you up and send you to CBS News or something. But
I don't want to go
but
to
it's hard.
CBS.
Okay. Well, it's hard work. Okay. And I'm just saying sobriety, getting a job, not getting someone pregnant before you're married. Statistically, if you look at those things, and then 2-parent families, those things are the keys to success in society, way more than any government program, way more.
let's talk about the schools, right? I imagine your kids went to private schools or independent schools. How do we fix public schools in California? Because we still have a wide education gap. I think the school people call it opportunity gap now, between whites and Asians and Latinos and African American students. Like, how do we fix this? And so talk a little about your attitudes on this issue.
Oh, wow, I wish I could wave a magic wand and return California's educational uh, prowess to what it was like maybe 30, 40, 50 years ago. Because it was at one point, a public education system to be envied. I think we've fallen pretty far from that. Uh, our kids are actually going next year, they're going to go to Dos Pueblos. So that's a great public school. And we have excellent public schools throughout the state. We just don't have enough of them, right? And I would, were it up to me, you know, uh, I would say school choice for the worst performing schools in California would be where I would start, Josh. And the teachers union is the most powerful entity in California. Make no mistake. Good luck. The only way you're going to get that passed is if there was an initiative and the people of California voted for it, right? School choice, putting checks. And I'm talking about segmenting out. If you and I looked at the worst performing schools, the bottom 20%, let's say, and said those people, and they've been that way, if you look at the statistics, maybe for decades, not just they had one bad year. It's chronically awful, right? I would empower those parents with choice, give them, and that would, I think, challenge the public schools in those chronically underperforming institutions to do a lot better than they are. I just think it's a government run institution, and by that very nature, it's going to underperform. Because if you and I, as parents, I know you're very involved with your kids, and your kids are doing well, Josh, and I'm really happy for that, and because you and your lovely wife, have made that a priority, education in your family. Um, but like you said, not all parents come from that same background, and they struggle, and maybe they are single income, and what choice do they have? They don't have that kind of ability to shape the public schools improvement. Um, so like I said, that would be my main structural change as I turn power to the people, power to parents, and particularly in underperforming. If your school's already doing great, your school system and your district, no, you don't need that choice. People can go pay for the private school that they want to go to. Um, and by the way, I want to tell everyone out there in your audience, if you are not happy with your public school, you can get scholarships. We, like I said, we are single income for kids, and actually it's a long story, but we're going to have 6 teenagers under our roof very soon. We're going to add 2 more. So that it's a long story, but you can go to some of these institutions. Coastline Christian Academy has been a great one, a fabulous school over there by Cathedral Oaks Athletic Club, really generous. If you don't have the resources, you can sometimes qualify for their generosity through a scholarship. And it doesn't mean, they're looking for ways. If you have a situation that is just not working, check out Coastline Christian Academy, check out Providence High School. They're really nice people, great people. They don't have a ton of, big facilities, although they're moving into the new one, I think, next year. But scholarships are a reality. There's just a lot of generosity there. Josh, I don't think you have to resign yourself to an underperforming or dangerous public school. I'm not saying they all are, but some, and in our area, not so much. But in other counties, there's some pretty dangerous schools for kids to go to.
Yeah, and what are the factors that make a dangerous school? I mean, why? And this is obviously we know this. We have schools that are really strong in terms of their test scores, and we have schools that are not so strong. How can we have this situation when we have like the same administration overseeing these things?
Well,
What is the issue?
I I
Why
don't
is
think we
Mountain
have.
View School, like a great school? Why is Dos Pueblos High School a place for people from Montecito to drive their kids to every day instead of Santa Barbara High? Like, what? How do we have
I,
this?
well, that's different. When you talk about dangerous schools, I think more about inner cities where there's just a lack of, there's just so many things wrong there. Um, I don't think we generally have that in Santa Barbara County. There are gradations of performance. Santa Barbara High School is not a bad high school.
Yeah.
There's a lot of kids who have a good experience there and do well and go on to succeed. Um, San Marcos High, I think, has a lot to offer. I know some kids who've gone there. We have some really good choices in our county. Dos Pueblos is a good school. Bishop Diego's a really good private school. I know they give scholarships and breaks when they can for those who need them. I think particularly here in South County, there's some excellent choices. So, um, you know, why is one school better than another? I guess because sometimes it could depend on the principal, depend on the teachers, it depends on the parents and the philosophy, the school board, what they're focused on. But I think there's a lot. I think if you look at one of the shortcomings of our school system, I think even though Christy Lozano did not do very well in her race for superintendent, I think it's a fair criticism to look at literacy rates, right? The ability, are we really turning out people who have a command of the language? Because as you said, you astutely pointed out, communication, ability to communicate is a huge thing. And if you don't have it, you're going to have a hard time. And so why aren't our schools, particularly in grade school, why aren't these kids learning, to speak English, to write, to communicate effectively? Um, that's that's something I don't have the answer to, but it's not going great, right? And we have a lot of people who are new to California, right? Whether you are a legal immigrant or an illegal immigrant, the fact is we're going to educate you, and so it's harder to teach someone who's comes from a background where the parents don't speak English as their first language. It's just a lot harder, right? I know I would have had a hard time. So I definitely had privilege because the language I speak is the language of the land primarily.
Yeah. Let's go over a couple of issues here. And I apologize to the audience. I'm going to jump back to national politics, but Robert F. Kennedy, right, Jr. I want to talk to you about him because there was a lot of buzz around him a few months ago, last year. Can he be the one who, is sort of the bridge between the conservatives and the Democrats, replace Donald Trump? And there's still people who are clinging to him. What it feels like that's the kind of a guy you would like here. What's your take on him and his campaign? And he's a bit of a COVID denier. Now I know he would say I'm not a COVID denier, but he raised the questions about the vaccines, and those are like things that conservatives brought up as well. So what's your take on him and his campaign?
It's funny you say that, Josh, because sometimes in Santa Barbara I drive around and I see a few yard signs for Robert F. Kennedy.
Yeah.
So I don't know exactly who he's appealing to, but I'm generally favorable. I'll tell you why. I like I have a thing for free thinkers. Okay, people who go against the grain a little bit. And Robert F. Kennedy isn't afraid to do that. I think that's interesting to me. Whether you're Elon Musk, uh, Barry Weiss, in journalism, there's some of these folks who cut against the grain, free thinkers. Who's the fellow who ran for governor? Oh gosh, he's written a few books. Why is his name escaping me? But I interviewed him once on the radio. Um, anyhow, I think Robert F. Kennedy is interesting character. I think that input needs to be there. It's good. I know Democrats are frustrated with him, but I think it's an interesting addition. I don't know that I agree with him on a lot of things, but I like him. I think it's nice when someone has the courage of their convictions to speak opinions that aren't necessarily popular.
But
What do you think about it?
you didn't jump on his bandwagon, right? Was it just because you didn't see him as a viable candidate?
No, I didn't jump on his bandwagon. I guess I just wanted to know more. I still do.
Yeah.
I don't. The Democrats have kind of voted him off the island, so to speak. We don't get to hear much from him, so I guess it has to come from his campaign. But I still am fascinated to hear. I don't know if he'd be a great president or not, but he's interesting. What did you think? I'm
Yeah.
curious.
Well, he was doing a lot of podcasts, a year ago or so, and he was interesting. I thought he had really good ideas because he's very much a science guy, with a couple of exceptions, where he talks about COVID and the vaccines, but he seems to be very strong environmentally and environmental policy and holding corporations accountable as a lawyer. And so I like that. And he's a great candidate. You talk about like charisma and personality, and he carries himself well. And so definitely I listened to a couple of those podcasts with him, with Bill Maher and others, sort of hearing his policies. And it was interesting to me to see if he would pick up any sort of steam. I have a hard time understanding him sometimes because of his speech,
Yeah.
and I think that
Yep.
hurts him
Yep. I agree.
because it's just like after a while you just like all right, it's work sometimes to like understand every word that
Yeah.
he's saying, and so that's not his fault, obviously. That's a condition, and but
Yep.
so there's that. He's got some stories came out, in the LA Times, and I it's not that I'm like this, like, judge people on their personal lives, but I have a problem with people who say I know how to create great policy, and he abandons his wife, and does these things morally, personally. Like, I have a problem with that, only in the sense of I do believe what you do in your private life is a thread through what you do in your public life. And if they were just honest about it, I could probably accept that, right?
Yeah.
It's when they're not, it feels a little bit off. So I have a little bit of a like, that's kind of interesting. I don't know if I can trust you running the country if you would do that, in your own personal life. But then I have to understand, as you said, that we don't know. I don't know what, my favorite movie star is doing. I don't know what, it's like, if we use that standard, we'll never leave the house, right? Like, God knows what your neighbor is doing, So yeah, I kind of get that. But, I would vote for Robert F. Kennedy Jr. over Trump, like if he were the Republican. I know he's not, but I would definitely, because I do think that he's smarter and more informed, and probably overall a better person overall. But
So
he's not having this. Here's what bothers me. I wish these debates would include him. I wish
me
we could
too.
see
Yeah.
all these people in the debates, because that airtime on national television, I know it's legacy, but like that airtime on your TV for everyone to see, you move mountains if people can hear you talk, so because
Yeah.
people, there's still a perception, it's like, well, if he's got to do it on his own, on a podcast, on the internet, through his own channels, well, he's not part of the mainstream, and that's still a real barrier for people to overcome.
Yeah. No, it's really good to hear your point of view on that, Josh. By the way, I was thinking of Michael Schellenberger, by the
Oh,
way.
yeah, the journalist.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I voted for him for governor, just so you know.
Okay.
So he was not the Republican, right?
Right.
I was the independent or whatever. I interviewed him on the radio. He's another free thinker. And I would like to hear, look, I would love to hear, just like you said, from Robert F. Kennedy. I think he should be on the debate stage. I like when Americans get more information. I like when we get to make decisions and the parties don't sit there and keep them out. I want to hear the free exchange of ideas. I'm not afraid of it, Josh. Even if it's not my candidate or it's not my party, I want to know, I want to hear these ideas. I really do. And I think, and I want to ask you this, Josh, I think it's interesting. A guy like that had the courage to say, you're not a denier of COVID, but he talked about, does the vaccine, I had people saying, and you watch the mainstream media pile on, this is a pandemic of the unvaccinated. You remember that? And they're talking about, do you have to sanction people because and even our federal government and our army start kicking people out because you didn't get vaccinated. Well, it turns out the vaccine didn't prevent you from getting COVID, and it didn't prevent you from spreading COVID. Maybe it decreased the severity of COVID. I still don't know definitively if that's the case. I got 4 shots and I stopped getting them. But what did you think of Robert F. Kennedy? At least he had, you see how quickly the establishment piles on and tries to turn someone like that who has fair questions into a kook and an outcast. I don't like that.
Yeah,
What,
I mean, obviously, Tom, you would agree though that in the game, in the challenge of trying to avoid COVID in life, it's better to be vaccinated than not vaccinated.
I don't think you avoid it. I think it maybe reduces severity. Like I said, I got 4 shots.
Did you
You
ever
know,
get
I,
COVID?
I I got COVID a few times, like
Uh-huh.
3 times, okay?
Yeah.
And none of them were a walk in the park. It sucked.
Yeah.
Okay. I understand, but you can still ask these questions. Is this good public policy? Is this good health policy? Should we have shut down the beaches in California when the safest place you could be on earth from COVID is at a beach? At Gaviota Beach. I remember telling my wife when COVID, I said, let's just take the kids to Flippin' Beach and figure out a way to walk around without anybody seeing. It was ridiculous.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, I was at a park walking around during COVID, and a couple about my age with masks on, and there was no one else in the park, and I'm jogging outside. And they stopped and started screaming at me, "Where's your mask?" And that's before N95 mask. KN95 would actually do some, to actually do the job. Yeah. And they're
Yeah.
shouting at me. I said, "Are you guys crazy? Are you insane? Let me jog. There's no one else here."
So let's go back to we got to wrap up soon. Let's go back to
Okay.
some local county stuff. Uh, we've got an election this year. Obviously, we talked about the presidential election. We've got some Santa Barbara City Council. We got some Goleta stuff. I'm sure we have some North County stuff. We just came off the Santa Barbara County Supervisor's race and upset of the decade in that first district supervisor, Doss Williams, was not reelected. And everyone has their own theory as to why. Everyone takes credit who doesn't like Doss. They say they were the reason. Um, you followed this, and I've talked to a lot of people on this issue, and among the theories for why he lost was that there was a kind of a shadow Republican campaign that backed Roy in order to, get Doss out of office. And even though Roy Lee is a Democrat, this hatred for Doss was far worse. Why did he lose? What role did the Republicans play in his defeat?
It's first of all, it's speculation, right? Because we don't really know unless someone does a survey how Republicans voted. Okay. There's a lot of people out there. There's a few individuals taking credit for Roy Lee's victory, saying that, they stirred up Republicans and that's why that he won. I think Republicans were, they vote, they're impactful, and they probably saw Roy Lee as a better choice. So I'm sure that had a role. Was it the defining role? I don't think so. I think it was a host of things. Republicans certainly chose someone they felt would be a better representative. I think Laura Capps softened up the battle there by waging a campaign and losing ultimately to Doss, but making cannabis the big. I know Doss, and I would say I'm friends with Doss. We come from different mindsets politically, but I really do like him. I know some Republicans can't stand him, and apparently some Democrats. But I saw things falling apart when you lose your patience with some of the cannabis complaints that came out of Carpinteria about the smell. And I don't think he was super patient with that. If you watch the videos of those hearings, not a lot of patience. Some people did not see the vision that cannabis was going to be this economic, panacea. Um, And I don't think it's played out that way either. I think it has not played out to be what everyone, at least what Doss thought it would be. So, and then he had like $100,000 in the bank, is my understanding. That's a little bit of a cardinal sin. You don't want to finish your campaign with a big chunk of money in the bank. You got to take every race seriously. And I know he's had tremendous success throughout his career. Um, so, I have respect for him, and, he's been very successful. And I'm sure he was shocked. I'm sure it was shocking to everyone. I like to say, Josh, that I prognosticate fairly well. But if you'd asked me on election eve, is Roy Lee going to beat Doss Williams? I would have said probably not. I don't think so. I wouldn't know why. Even though, like I said, Laura came, I forget how many points Laura Capps lost by, but it was it was close enough that if
I
I
think it
had
was
been in
like
Doss's
1,500
shoes,
votes, 1,500. That's not a lot of votes,
it's not a lot of votes, and I would have taken any challenge seriously after that. I would, and Doss has notoriously been a great kind of retail politician, so I don't know how it added up to
What,
be
what's, what do you mean a retail politician?
retail, meaning he's been good at constituent service, good at going out and shaking hands and knocking on doors. That's a lot of the hard work, right, that you got to do. It's really not very sexy stuff, Josh. Knocking on doors and asking for people's support on a hot Saturday afternoon is, once people get in office for a long time, they lose their taste for that kind of, they lose the eye of the tiger, right? You don't want to do it anymore. So I
Yeah.
don't know if he did last time around,
Well,
because he didn't lose
definitely.
by much to Roy.
No, he lost. Yeah, not by much. I think it might have been like 2.5 to 3 percentage points, but there's definitely the DOS of the last 2 years is unlike the DOS before that, since he's come into the public eye, and it's a big mystery. But uh, did Mike Stoker was going around like claiming he was the mastermind behind the whole thing. What's your take on Mike Stoker? Is he the godfather of the Republican Party, or is he just kind of trying to take credit for things? And Mike, don't email me if you're watching this. I already know what
Mike, look, I like Mike. He's indefatigable, right? He's got this kind of energy. You just wind him up and he goes. And if I interviewed him the other day on the radio too. He's got, to Mike's credit, he has a lot of really good thoughts and ideas. I think he has a good understanding of economics. I think he would be a good member of Congress. I really do. That being said, I think I would tell him to his face. I think he'd overstated a little bit if he thought he was the difference. I'm sure he made an impact if he worked with Republicans, but um, you know, I don't think you take sole credit for electing Roy Lee. I would disagree with Mike on that, but it doesn't mean that Mike doesn't, didn't make a difference or didn't do something of value there. I think he did, and Mike's an interesting character, and like I said, if we were a different county in terms of registrations, Mike might have continued to serve in public office rather than being a supervisor all those years ago. He might have been able to continue doing that or do something else. But
yeah.
we're not.
Let's before we wrap up, let's talk Santa Barbara. Mayor Randy Rouse upset Kathy Murillo 3 years ago or two, whatever it was, to win the mayor's seat. Big surprise, right? Because she's the Democrat, endorsed by the Democratic Central Committee. Party registration favors the Democrats, and Randy just so popular from his historic connections. What kind of a job is Randy doing as mayor from your perspective?
I think Randy's doing a good job.
Mhm.
I think he's exactly the kind of citizen politician that you want in that office. It's unfortunate to a certain extent, the way our system is set up. His vote is pretty much the same as anyone else's vote on the council, right? And
Yeah.
I think he's outnumbered. Randy's more middle of the road. I call him a little right of center. I think that's great to have your mayor be that way. I think Randy would agree that, for instance, State Street needs to be opened up again to traffic. You need to reclaim State Street, but he's in a minority. I think there's other representatives on there are more liberal, and I think he's doing the best he can. I think he runs a good meeting, which is super important. And he articulates, if you watch the meetings, what issues are important. I think that's key. I think Helene Schneider did a great job of that. If you're out there, Helene, I had a lot of respect for how you ran those meetings. I think
Helene Schneider's a regular watcher. At least that's what she tells me, and I know that she doesn't want to mislead me.
well, she did a great job, just kind of helping people stay focused. I think Kathy lost because she wasn't very skilled that way. She didn't really run the meetings that well. I think she had a hard time. I think it was not, that job didn't suit her. And in the end, you win in the mayorship, right, Josh, by a plurality of votes. It's not, you don't have to win 50% plus one. So I forget, I think Randy's victory was resounding. Um, but still, it leaves the opportunity for a more conservative person to be a mayor in Santa Barbara. I think he's doing a good job. I wish State Street, I don't know what you think, Josh. I'm curious to hear before we go. Um, I think State Street's a mess. Uh, I think having these parklets out there doesn't look good. Look, I love to take my son Brody to Dodger games. We go to one or two a summer when we can get down there. I love how clean it is. I love how fun it is. I love how safe it is. State Street should be more like Dodger Stadium. It should be more. It should be nice. It should be clean. It should be a pleasant experience. It should be a place where people are desperate to go to have a world-class experience, and it's not that way. It's just not. It's not clean. I know the downtown organization is pushing, to have things be better. But as long as you block it off, I think it's kind of a mess. Do you think I'm out of line with your thinking or what Santa Barbarans think generally?
No, I think that you raise a point that a lot of people agree with, and Randy has moved the conversation a little bit more in favor of reopening at least maybe some blocks to vehicles. It is a mess. It is shabby. My concern there is the bicycles, the e-bikes. So if we will be honest with the public and just
Yes.
we decided to close State Street during COVID, and we're going to keep it closed because we don't want cars and we want bikes and take it or leave it. If they would just say that, I'd be like, okay, that's your plan, right? You make it a bike thoroughfare. But they're trying to still try to tell us that it's for everybody. It's a promenade. It's for pedestrians, for bikes. It's for people with dogs and walking and seniors and young people. It's like, if you try to walk, like most people on State Street have moved back to the sidewalk if you're a pedestrian.
Yes.
And it's basically become just look at me
Right.
on my bikes, on my e-bikes, and they go very fast. And I think that if you're somebody who doesn't like cars because of the environmental impacts, if you're sort of one of these people who is trying to say we need to get out of our cars and let's stop driving, and you're promoting e-bikes. Okay, I think that you're favoring a very small group of people to enjoy this public space, this taxpayer-funded public streets, and it's if we're gonna make it a promenade, like let's no bikes,
Yes.
just
Right.
flatten the street,
Yeah.
make it do the parklets beautifully. But you're trying to do that, and then you're allowing these people on e-bikes to just whiz down. And unless you're looking behind you constantly, it's not a fun experience. You worry about things.
Hey, Josh, I almost got hit a couple of times. It's not safe. Someone's gonna get hit, a tourist, if they haven't already. It's not the right mix. It's poorly conceived. These parklets are a mess. I'm sure their rat problem or rodent problem with all the food out there has to be increased. In my opinion, it's a total disaster. I like walking. You're right, Josh. You nailed it. If you want to make a plan and invest in a complete promenade where it looks beautiful and we're all walking and it's set up to be that way and conceived to be that way, I know it's expensive, but then commit to that vision. Otherwise, take it back to cars, clean up the sidewalks, I saw a guy, gosh, it turned on Coda the other day. He's just whipped it out. He's peeing all over the place in the middle of the day. This is the kind of thing, we need our law enforcement out there to, enforce the law. No homeless encampments on State Street. Those people need to be able to get treatment, but no, between the homeless encampments and the parklets and all this, I think you said it. It's shabby. It's a mess. Why can't we be clean and excellent? I just want someone to paint a vision, Josh, of one of the world's best destinations, a street everyone in Santa Barbara can be proud of. And it's not that way right now. It's just not.
Yeah, yeah, definitely not. Okay, well, Tom, I appreciate your time. We went way longer than we did last time. But we could probably go like 3 hours here just talking about
Sure.
things. I want to give you the final word. I know you're not running for office. I know that you've got your plate full. You've already, you just came off a Central Committee victory, but just give you the last word here to sort of, let people know about Tom Widroe and your work in the community and, anything you wanted to add before we wrap up.
Well, thanks, Josh. Let's see. I just want to say, I think, to kind of quote Ronald Reagan, our best days are ahead of us here in Santa Barbara County. I want us as a community to embrace housing and embrace growth. Families are good for Santa Barbara County. Jobs are good for folks. Good schools. We should be bullish on Santa Barbara, not afraid of building the economy and bringing talented people to the Central Coast who have places to live. Right now, it's a real struggle economically for people to make it here, and so I just think we have as a community, we should come together instead of just talking about housing all the time. We should be building housing. I think that's the number one priority for communities throughout California is to build housing where people can have a roof over their heads and can build families like you and I have. We need a place to call home, and it's really hard for folks to do it here in Santa Barbara. But yeah, I wanted to say I love the Central Coast. I'm grateful. We live here in Buellton, but we're moving to Goleta, so back down. And I've just enjoyed living throughout different places in this county and spent my entire adult life here since I was 18. And I really do treasure it. It's been a really good life here, and hopefully it'll continue to be that.
All right. Well, thanks a lot, Tom Widroe. I look forward to running into you around town, grabbing coffee. We can continue our conversations off camera and keep learning from
Uh,
one another. So thanks a
could,
lot.
could could I say one last thing? Is
Yeah.
that Newshawk? I want to tell you and Janine Scully, as a reporter of yours and others, Gina, you, and I'm not just blowing smoke here. I am so grateful that we have journalism, even if it doesn't always go my way in a news article or whatever I'm working on in public affairs. I'm so grateful for Newshawk. Santa Barbara News Press is no more. Bill saw the future a number of years ago, and I really encourage, hopefully your readership will continue to grow and you'll do the local reporting that to be the paper of record. Really, I call it paper, but the digital news source of record for a long time. I really hope Newshawk is flourishing because super valuable.
Yeah, no, great. Definitely. Thanks a lot. I know Bill will be very happy with those comments and yeah, Newshawk's doing great. And so it's profitable and it's not going anywhere. And we need as many strong media sources as we can have because the news press died. It had been dead for a long time. I know the conservatives kind of took it over there at the end, but from a pure
Yeah.
journalistic perspective, it hasn't been anything, for a long time. And so yeah, we need more journalism because what happens when we don't have journalism is the people in power get away with a lot more things, and
Yep.
corruption goes unchecked and unnoticed. And even with journalists, we only catch a fraction of it. So,
Right.
we don't want to lose any more of it. So thanks a lot, Tom. I appreciate your time. Have a great day, and we'll talk soon.
Thanks again. Take care, Josh.
Thanks.